All right, I am now talking live on the internet for the first time in 2025. Um, I mean, that's not precisely true. I've had meetings since then, so I have talked on the internet, but I'm talking on Twitch and YouTube for the first time in 2025. So, yes, Happy New Year. It basically sadly we had to take the Christmas lights down, but rest assured, they're always there, lurking, waiting. They may be sprung on you at any point. Christmas can happen at any point. So let me pull my face into this. Let me get my face involved in this conversation. There it is. Never know. There also may be a random Christmas tree that could pop up. But that one's very cyberpunk, so it's less likely to get used. So, what we are here to talk about today is the last month, the last stream we had before the end of 2024, before we threw 2024 in the bin and said goodbye to it, is we had a random Christmas is always low but never zero. But I had to double check where that message was coming from because I'm like, oh wait, I just missed the YouTube symbol in it. The combined chat always makes me have to remind myself. But in any case, last time we were here, we had a cyberpunk Christmas. So, staying in theme? No, not really. We're all basically, instead, we are moving on to Victory. We're doing a Victorian New Year's, is basically the theme for this session, or this next couple of several sessions, as you may have seen in the pre-roll. We're doing a kind of London-based theme for part of the month, a World of Darkness theme for part of the month. It all kind of flows together. It ebbs and flows all together. And so what the schedule for this month, this January 2025, is we are taking this week and next week to go over Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition, the Victorian era. It all basically, it's a mouthful and it's not even really consistent. I believe it is Victorian Age. Basically, Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition Victorian Age. However, the jumpstart for it, just for whatever reason, refers to it as Victorian Era Mage, the 20th Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition. So, era, age, it's all the same thing. Basically, it's all the idea. Basically, yeah. Who's posting as Lorling? If I'm here and you're there, who's driving the bus? And so basically, so there's a lot to unpack in that sentence that I just said out. Parts of the Victorian sentence, we'll call it Victorian Mage. Yep. So I will basically, let's start off with that. Let's break down what we're doing here. Actually, I'm finishing up my summary month. I'm getting ahead of myself. Focus. One straightforward path here. Okay, so this week, next week, we are doing planning for an adventure for the mouthful, which is usually abbreviated M20 Victorian Age. That is how you will see us usually referring to it. It's in fact the title of the stream down there refers to it as M20 The Victorian Age. And then on next Friday, not this Friday, but next Friday, so the 17th of January 2025, we will be running an adventure in M20 Victorian Age, which you will see being built right here. It's going to be a mix of interesting things. We'll see how it works out. We'll get more into that in a bit. Next, after that, we will take a brief break from running and building to have some fun and throw some more chaos in, and go to our video game roots. This is Twitch after all. And we will actually play one of the less successful basically World of Darkness video games known as Hunter the Reckoning. It was their attempt to do to World of Darkness what Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance did for D&D. and Champions of Norath did for EverQuest. It's not great. It works. I've had fun. Basically, it is fun to play and fun to watch, but it is by no means a classic of game. Basically, a lot of World of Darkness video games have had problems actually pulling off what they've stated to do. I think the closest they've come is the visual novels format has probably worked best. Hey, Wolf Mom has worked best for World of Darkness gaming. There was the most recent Werewolf the Apocalypse video game, which was better than average, I think. This would be the way to describe it. It was by no means a great game, but it wasn't terrible. There was the RPG, the RPG Vampire the Masquerade, Bloodlines, which that one is well respected, but only after you fan patch it to here at basically to the high heavens. Otherwise, the game just simply does not work. Or works and is buggy, or otherwise is not successful, shall we say. Once it's patched, there's a great game in there, but boy howdy, much like the Temple of Elemental Evil, also I believe by the same company, it does not work well. And then before that, you have a couple of other unsuccessful ones, including Hunter the Reckoning. I don't remember any of the other ones, but probably the most successful ones, at least solid throughout, are the visual novels, as long as that is what you're interested in. Okay. The music is loud in my ears. Is it loud to anybody else? Just doing a quick check on that. Yeah, the Hunter beat 'em up game. I forgot there were two of them, weren't there? There was the Hunter the Reckoning one, which is what we'll be playing here in a couple of weeks, and then there was a sequel one. Okay, it's not super loud, it's just loud in my headphones. Okay, I will turn down my headphones, so that works. That's easy. I can do that. So, and there were probably some other ones. Wayward and Redeemer. Okay, yeah. Okay, so, and then after that, we will return to our London Magic roots, basically this month in January for Rivers of London, which is a book series by Ben Aronovich, which is kind of a police procedural with magic, is what the book series sets in. Basically, it's a magic is returning to magic had existed, had gone, it ebbed away, and is now coming back for mysterious reasons, and so a police department is having to deal with that rise of magic returning. So it works out pretty well. It's a fairly interesting series of books. I'm looking forward to talking about the game. All right, so what are we talking about here in terms of campaign planning? So, World of Darkness. Basically, we've talked about that a little bit in the past, I believe. If you go to lorelink.com lorelink.com and go to systems, not examples, systems. There we go. We talked about Vampire the Dark Ages back in the past, and in fact, you can. We'll need to. Oh, apparently I have the wrong thumbnail on this one. I'll need to change that. Cool. But basically, Vampire the Dark Ages: Legacy of Lies. So basically, we looked a little bit in Vampire, basically World of Darkness in the past. So what World of Darkness is they said basically coming out in the mid to late 90s. Basically D&D and basically the rest of its ilk had risen and was ebbing for a little bit. Basically, second edition hadn't performed quite as well as everyone might have hoped. So the D&D brand was still strong, but basically people were kind of tired of your standard fantasy game. But so they were looking for other stuff, and so you saw a rise of a lot of other interesting ones, and it's the 90s, which means you also have a rise of edgy and punk, and like even goth was in there as well. But the idea, basically, the fact that people don't want basically necessarily be the good guys anymore. What if we played the bad guys? Um, Basically, 90s edginess extreme. Slap a bunch of pockets on it. That's the 90s. Little pouches and things like that. Um, and so the 90s was that time period. And so born out of that time period came this idea for the world of darkness, which was the idea of the fact that, hey, what if we let players play the monsters, as it were? In a modern setting. What if we took the universal monsters essentially, and made them into basically what if we played games along those lines? But of course, we didn't want to do the actual universal monsters, um, because those are copyrighted from here and back. So we're just going to we're going to base them on their general ideas. So we start with vampire, where you can play vampires. Then you have werewolf, where you play werewolves. Then there is mage, where you play wizards. And it went on from there as they kept going, and basically money rolled in. And so, of course, they wanted to keep printing money. So they kept throwing additional. Why is Wolf Mom excited about werewolf? Could be anything. They kept printing additional books and things like that that went deeper and deeper into horror and other categories. So you got everything from Wraith, which was about ghosts, kind of, and then you had Mummy, because hey, we're sticking with the Universal monsters. So you had Mummy, and then of course, basically now you've played the bad guys so much. Well, if you literally played the good guys in this world where the bad guys aren't bad, they're just misunderstood. So now the good guys are bad guys who are just misunderstood, or good guys who are misunderstood. They're not actually good; they're bad. So you had Hunter, which went through alternate forms where they were just people who hunted monsters, to they became their own weird angel demon driven scenarios. It got weird for a while there. Then the entire world ended, because the other big thing World of Darkness tried to do was the fact that they kind of tried to build this living world where all of these groups existed in tandem, much like D&D had done, with it's basically the idea of the fact that, oh hey, we've got basically you've got this character in the system, and then you've got this world where all these different groups and organizations exist, and things happen, and those things affect the game. And so a lot of their world building and things like that was building a lot of conspiracies and other stuff, because it was a modern game. And so you had a bunch of conspiracies that ranged from, oh, okay, that's kind of funny. Okay, so that's what happened with that ship. Meta plot is the word I'm looking for. Good point. Basically, you had a lot of things. Oh, that's what happened with that ship, or that's why that colony of basically of people disappeared off the coast of New England. Basically at the beginning of during the Pilgrims, the Roanoke and the Croatoan. What happened with them? Oh, okay. Here's the meta plot. Here's a meta plot explanation for that. Here's what was going on with the mummies and the Egyptians, and basically all of these conspiracy theories that they kind of wrapped in and moved in, and some of them were good and some of them were okay. There was the insane vampire basically buried under the Middle East, which they tried to explain why things were crazy in the Middle East, which was probably not the best thought out idea. But all of that kind of build up, and eventually they reached the point in the meta plot where they realized they'd done so much of it, and the line itself was kind of running out of steam and money, because there's only so often you can keep producing all these books and other stuff before they realized that their meta plot had gotten too heavy and was weighing down everything, and they really wanted to change the system. So much like when D&D went from first to second ed, they went, what if the world ended? What if all these things we've been talking about happened? And so they released a series of books, of which most of which are sitting on my shelf. Like 3 of which I think I'm missing 1. basically they just decided, they published books where like the vampire world ended, all the bad things that can happen to vampires that we've hinted at and talked about happen. All the old vampires wake up, Kane goes through and murders all the vampires, the vampire blood gets too thin and nobody can make vampires anymore. All of those bad things happen. Werewolves, who are the protectors of the nature and the environment, screw up and don't protect it, and all the bad things happen with basically it gets out of whack, gets out of balance. All the things which are predicted at the end of them happen, and all basically mage, all the people work up. Basically, all the people wake up. Basically, or either ascend, or the technocracy win and destroys magic forever, or they essentially just released a book of like, here's all the endings we could think of. This is the end. Here's all the conspiracy theories we could think of. Time of Judgment was everything else, which was their Wraith wrap up, their Mummy. I don't know if Mummy actually got mentioned. Hunter and the weird demon and angel line, I think, all get wrapped up in the Time of Judgment book, which is the one I don't have. And so that is the world of darkness. You have werewolves, you have vampires, you are changeling. Yes, of course. All of that, basically, a changeling is their other big line. Fairies and fae exist, and they wander around. So, in any case, so all of that to say, the world of darkness, what basically is the idea of the fact that, hey, we're living in a world where all of these things are true and real, but in order to explain the fact that they're true and real, you have to have a reason why. Basically, you're trying to use an actual modern thing. You're trying to say your city right now could be part of the world of darkness, and you just don't know. So it's the idea of the fact that, okay, these monsters therefore have to hide themselves. Like the plot of every monster, basically every monster book, movie, rom-com, all of those basically always have this thing where the monsters have to remain hidden because otherwise humanity will destroy them. There are more of them than there are more of us than there are of them, therefore they must fear us, etc., etc. Basically the answer that World of Darkness came up usually had an answer for each line, as it were, as it came out. Vampires had a strict series of rules that prevented them from getting hunted. So basically any vampire that broke the rules, called the Masquerade, got hunted down, almost basically got hunted down immediately. Of course, there was immediately a rival group that broke off and were still doing their own thing, but that's beside the point. You have to have rebels in your game. So that's vampires. There's a set of rules. You don't violate them. That's how the vampires are staying hidden, because they don't break the rules. The people in charge enforce the rules. Werewolves, their big thing is the fact that one point they were the masters of humankind. And then they got thrown down for their arrogance, but humanity has a collective ancestral memory that makes werewolves terrifying for them to see. Therefore, anytime a human sees a werewolf, they go, mind blanks out for a second, they run screaming, they have various reactions to this idea, and therefore it gets explained away as giant animal attack or something else happened, basically because no one can recall exactly really what happened, because if you see a werewolf in werewolf form, your mind blanks it out because of ancestral memory of being prey. So that's how the werewolves stay hidden. Mage, which is the one we're talking about here today, has a more interesting solution to it, in my opinion. The mage solution is the fact that magic is real. Magic exists, and special people eventually wake up to the fact and realize the fact that, hey, magic is real. That's cool. People can do magic. But basically, essentially their excuse is, yes, magic is real because reality is malleable. You can do whatever you want. You can break the rules of reality because reality is just a perception thing. It's really just your perception and your will. And basically reality can be bent and moved and manipulated and twisted, and you could do all the cool things that get described as magic. You can teleport from place to place. You can You can catch bullets, you can heal wounds, you can set things on fire at a distance, you can pull swords out of walls. You can do all of those cool things because basically as long as you have the will to do it. However, reality exists as a essentially as a, I won't say mass hallucination. That's a weird way of putting it, but as essentially reality is enforced by all the people around it believing in it. So you walk down the street believing that the gravity holds you down, that the street is solid, that basically that the air you're breathing is oxygen, etc., etc. Basically, and hundreds of basically millions of people on the planet do that every day, and that reinforces that belief. Therefore, that is the thing that happens. And when a mage comes along and says, gravity doesn't hold me down, I can fly. Or, that's not oxygen, it's fire. Basically, fire exists here now. It is burning that oxygen when fire wasn't there before. Reality itself starts to fight back against it. And the bigger the display of magic you're doing, the more reality itself will fight back against it. And the more people who are there to reinforce, basically work against your perception of reality, but otherwise known as witnesses, are the sleepers, basically those who don't believe in magic, the harder reality will fight to shut you down. And so therefore, yeah, you could throw a fireball in the middle of this. You could throw a fireball if you're alone. It works. Basically reality, basically the amount of kickback you get from reality is reduced. However, you try to throw a fireball during the Macy's Day Parade, and basically reality basically takes a much more, basically all those people there reinforcing reality take a much dimmer view on that, and you get kicked in the teeth for it. And they process, which is known as paradox, is what it is known as in the main system. And yeah, basically, I believe it is called stream. I'm trying to remember what the exact word that's basically straits. Straits is what it is called in Victorian Age. And we'll get more into that in a second. But the idea of the fact that, okay, that's what's going on is basically reality is reasserting itself back on top of the situation. The more people who are there are more likely to kick back in your face. And of course, because you have to have an evil bad guy, otherwise, it's hard. Basically, it's less interesting for your players to just have, basically, you're a bunch of reality bending stuff and you can do whatever you want. As time has passed, there is a group of evil mages. Evil, of course, is always a subjective term, depending on where you're standing. A group of rival mages, a group of mages without magic's best interest at heart, etc., etc., have decided that the way reality should be working, and basically the best path forward for humanity is to essentially convert magic from being this all-knowing, all-unknowing thing that could do weird and wild and wonderful stuff in defiance of everything, and nail it down with a bunch of rules and a bunch of systems and a bunch of easy explanations and a bunch of technology, essentially. And so basically they are known alternately as the council of the council of reason, or the technocratic union, or just the technocracy. They are the Men in Black. They are the New World Order. They are all the people who show up to make cool things that happen and basically explain away what happened and make you disappear. They are big government. They are the X-Files. They are all of those things that show up and shut all these things down because reality is good. They exist, essentially. They have taken upon themselves that they have their idea for what reality is, and therefore everything that goes against that, what they call reality deviance, should be extinguished, basically removed. They have their reasons for it. Wild magic, basically magic getting thrown around, tears the fabric of reality, sets up bad things, and invites evil, basically actual evil, capital E, things from basically from beyond the universe, essentially into ours, and they do bad things when they get here. They tend to, eat people, destroy, just basically destroy entire cities, corrupt things, bad. Basically, they do lots of bad things. And so, hey, if we get rid of all these reality deviants, reality will lock into place, everything will be fine. And we just, 90% of the time, of course, and just so happens, we'll be the ones in charge. Oh, how convenient. So that is the main conflict of Mage. Basically, Mage the Ascension, as it were, is the idea of the fact that you have wizards who want to do cool stuff and open people's eyes to magic and all the wonderful, cool thing magic can do. While in reality, basically, reality fights against it. And then there's a group that says, no, magic shouldn't exist. It's way too powerful. It's way too wild. It's way too uncontrolled. Everything should be safe and normal. And here, look at this cool technology stuff. Simple as that. And so that's your main conflict in Mage. Basically, as a mage yourself, you have awakened, and you're wanting to wake other people up because, hey, as much as I hate to say, like all that, like wake up sheeple and all that stuff in terms of that is essentially what the mage are. The mage are. There are a bunch of people who are like, look around, the world has cool stuff. You could do cool things. Everything could be wonderful and wild and interesting and creative and bizarre and basically you should wake up to that fact. And if we could just wake people up, basically everything would be cooler and different. And of course, within basically you will then immediately break down and have different people like, we should wake people up so they do cool art stuff, or we should wake people up but they should follow the rules with magic, because magic should have rules, not like the technocracy rules. There should still be magic, but it should have rules. I've got absolutely horrible news. There is not about Mage. There isn't a TV show about Mage as far as I'm aware. There is one about vampire though. Hey, Wolf Mom, what do you think about that one? I'll let Wolf Mom bash her head on the keyboard for a bit. But essentially, that is the central conflict for Mage. And so 90s, of course it was, because vampires were cool during the 90s. Yep. But so basically, so you have what is known as the Ascension War, which is a bunch of groups of people who have different ideas over why people should wake up and how people should wake up. And then you have the technocracy trying to shut everything down, and all that is going on. So, you may have noticed that basically the 20th anniversary, basically we are actually way past the 20th anniversary, ironically. But essentially, remember when I said that all the lines came to an end because everything became too top heavy? So eventually, basically, World of Darkness reached a point where the edition was too top heavy. It was a revised edition. It didn't work. It kind of all started to fall apart. D&D 3rd Ed got popular and started shoving everything into the niche of, hey, everything should be, if you want to make money, you need to be using the D20 system, and Werewolf wasn't, and basically Werewolf and World of Darkness wasn't, and so they started to lose money and they started to make bad business decisions, and so they hemorrhaged a lot of mummy. And so it they tried to reboot it a couple of different times. It didn't go well. It has splintered and fractured since that point. You have, basically, and the rights have gone back and forth, and I don't really want to spend all that much time talking here today about all the rights problems with, all the rights problems that happen to World of Darkness. It's currently owned by half a different people. different versions and editions. Essentially, what you need to know if you're looking into World of Darkness is there is essentially three major branches of World of Darkness. There's something known as Chronicles of Darkness, which is which was the first system that came out after they did World of Darkness. It was its own thing. It was essentially a wild reboot, complete with completely different names for all of the books, because they were new and different. And we were basically, it wasn't Werewolf the Apocalypse anymore. It was Werewolf the Forsaken, because now the werewolves basically had screwed up, and they were the bad. Basically, they were darker. They were darker and edgier. I can't remember. Basically, Mage was now the Awakening instead of the Ascension. That mostly stayed the same. Vampire had its own different name. I can't remember it off the top of my head. It tried. It didn't work great. They rebooted it again. And there's a World of Darkness 2, I think, essentially. Or 4th edition. Or 5th edition, I think it's called. Which was them going, hey, let's try again. Let's go back. Vampire the Requiem is basically the Chronicles of Darkness version. There's essentially World of Darkness 2 or World of Darkness 4th edition, maybe 5th edition, which is the new one that you can buy from Renegade Studios, I believe. And it's just as problematic. It's got lots of issues. I'm not going to go deep into those. But let's just say, hey, if you're going to do an edition which basically tries to base itself on being friendly to minority groups, actually listen to minority groups. Weird fact. So that's what basically that is that. And then realizing that they're basically somewhere in there in the middle of all of that stuff going badly, they decided, hey, you know what? People just want to play the old editions. What if we just cleaned up the rules for the old edition and re-released those? And so you got what is known as the 20th anniversary editions. And that proved to be wildly successful. So you ended up now with, essentially, you have Vampire 20th edition, basically Werewolf 20th Anniversary Edition, and Mage 20th Anniversary Edition. All of which are essentially cleaned up, redone versions of the original, basically some rules tweaks, things to make things a little bit nicer, but not drastically different than the original versions. Mostly compatible. You probably need to do some work if you're going backwards, but they basically, so that is, I believe, basically this is somewhat subjective, obviously, in my opinion. Those are the more stable versions. They're the more fun versions. I hate saying that because any game system, there are very, 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 very few game systems I will outright be like, no. Just no. Never play these. There's no one. Basically, if you like these, you should feel bad for liking them. There's like 2, I think, that they're on that list of basically, the relatively complete inside of a single book, as opposed to dealing with they were supposed to be essentially summaries of all the stuff that happened and all, because one of the other big things that World of Darkness did was, because they didn't hate money, is the fact that because everything would have all these different organizations or groups or other things underneath it. That was their big selling point. And so they would release little tiny books about yay big for $10-15 that would give you more information, more cool mechanical stuff, and some lore stuff over a single group or maybe 2 groups of that. And then they basically say you could end up having to buy 10 or 15 books basically in order to have the full complete world for Vampire, and then there are 10 or 15 books to get the full complete world for Werewolf. It got old fast, and so the 20th anniversary said, we won't do that. We're going to release everything as one book. They've mostly done that. They don't really fall into the basically they don't do what they're called as splat books. But in any case, the 20th anniversary editions are fairly complete. They're in one book. they're probably my preferred way of interacting with World of Darkness if I'm interacting with World of Darkness. Um, the original editions are some of the first stuff that I actually started playing when I was basically first getting into spread, when I was first extending my horizons past basically past D&D. My early college days. I was basically one of my first role playing games that wasn't D&D was Vampire the Masquerade. It's where one of my usernames comes from. It's from a random character I had there. But basically Vampire and Werewolf was fun, and Mage is always the one that's basically is the interesting one, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I think so. Mage 20th Anniversary Edition is the base set for this. To talk about, we've talked about all of that stuff, and we're getting closer to the actual game. So all of that, then you basically, so they released Mage at 20th Anniversary Edition, and almost all of the books basically have a, hey, what if we go into the past where these groups are a little bit more powerful? Because again, when the idea is, hey, we've got a worldview where you're in a modern era, so it's getting harder and harder for the monsters to hide just because of society as a whole. Even in the 90s, you already had, basically, you had people with camcorders. You had news and television and things like basically, and cameras and security cameras and things like that. And so monsters are getting basically are harder to hide, as it were, in this modern era. So all of them released books like, hey, let's go back to a time when things were a little easier for each of these groups, and we'll pick a thematic time that's kind of interesting. Vampire went back to excuse me. Vampire went back to what we've talked about in what we ran before, which was Dark Ages. The idea of the fact that, hey, when everything is its own tiny kingdoms and things like that, where it's just feudal lords, a vampire running an entire kingdom or a sect of people and having full control over them and basically keeping people as cattle and things like that really slots well into that kind of Dark Ages mindset. Plus, thematically, Dark Ages, vampires works well together. And so that's where the vampires kind of got some. Yeah, well, you're vampires. When you're looking at people are food, not friends. To flip a quote. And so, hey, if you rely on these things for food, there you go. So yes, vampires refer to people as the herd. I guess I should probably issue a disclaimer. If you start looking at anything in the World of Darkness, it was edgy. It is 100% edgy. It really wants to be edgy and pushing boundaries and things like that, because it was not your father's D&D. Which is hilarious given how boundary pushing and weird and otherwise weird stuff D&D got into. But in any case, it was the 90s. We had to do stuff differently. So they pushed boundaries in a lot of different places and things like that. And sometimes we're not necessarily take good caretakers of the stuff they get. That's a good stuff. It's a lot of cultural sensitivity issues. So it will push your basically if this is one of those things where basically I've harped on in the past and I will continue to harp on it. Session zeros can be your friends. Session zeros can be necessary, especially when you're playing with modern stuff, especially when you're playing with stuff like this that can push people's boundaries. Be careful. Talk to your players. Basically, they've gotten better about it. Mostly. Again, see past about Vampire 5th Edition and Werewolf 5th Edition having problems with a capital P. But they at least pay some lip service to it. Like the book I'm looking at, basically the Victorian Age book has an introduction which says, hey, talk to your players, because just because they're basically historical accuracy is not an excuse for you inflicting prejudice, basically racism, sexism on your players. don't do that. So I basically blanket there's a fan project stripping those issues on the Werewolf 20th. There's a history of basically about World of Darkness and having fans having to fix the stuff that the people have created to actually get the decent product out of it. In any case, so Werewolf went back, basically vampires went back to the Dark Ages. Werewolf went to the Wild West because it was a time period they could think of, and probably because somebody probably proposed Werewolf BC and it got shot down because nobody wanted to deal with that. Because that's the last time werewolves were really in power. So Wild West, at least, you've got guns and bullets, which means you can still have the problem of fear of silver bullets and things like that. Hey, you've got the Lone Ranger out there somewhere. But it's much easier to hide the fact that you're a werewolf when you're in the Wild West. And again, werewolf gets a lot of the environmentalism. Shattered Dreams is basically Shattered Dreams the actual Werewolf BC essentially. Huh, interesting. But Old West was their big one. Oh, cool. So Old West was their big one. Basically Wild West, and plus their werewolves are the environmental one, which unfortunately gets lumped in a lot with Native Americans. And so therefore when you're dealing with basically, oh hey, Wild West, there's a lot of those groups just sitting out there for us to deal with. So that's why they get shunted to the Wild West. And Mage, when they looked back, basically went, hey, go back to a time period when magic is more accepted, when reality itself is more flexible, because when people look at the world and somebody throws a fire, hey, that basically in the past, people are less likely to go, you can't do that, and be like, you're a witch, burn you. Doesn't end well for you either way, but basically magic itself isn't kicking you in the teeth. So you have interestingly enough, though, they did two different versions of that. Sorcerer's Crusade was the original version of it, which was essentially them in Renaissance time period. Which is, so you're just starting to get basically people starting to try to lock down the world of scientific discoveries and things like that with the Enlightenment and Renaissance. But you still have a lot of you're coming out of the Dark Ages, because we did that already. And basically, but magic works slightly differently. Paradox isn't kicking people in the teeth as hard. But on the other hand, basically this is still mostly a European-based game, and so you're dealing with a lot of, hey, basically throwing magic around isn't seen as great. And so basically you'll get hunted down if you do too much of it. Be careful with that. So Magic, however, for the 20th anniversary version of it, they decided to move that forward a bit, and that's how we get the Victorian Age. Yay, we finally got back to what we're talking about today, and it's only 5:50. Cool. That's why we have 2 planning sessions for these things. So, Victorian Age is taking that same idea that we just started talking about in the with the Renaissance and things like that, the idea of the fact that you're dealing with a time period where the reality is more malleable, but it moves it up and it gives it a much greater source of conflict. I think it was a good idea to move it to Victorian. I think Victorian has a much tighter and easier conflict to fit into the mage aesthetic. Basically, you have the Industrial Revolution starting up. So you've got the idea of the fact that, hey, there is a group, basically, technology is starting to become this thing. The rules of reality are starting to get set. Machinery and technology are starting to, they're starting to basically wind up and basically make these things and set basically scientific discoveries are pushing people into, oh, hey, this is how the world works. And therefore reality is getting solidified. You also have that idea of the fact that the Industrial Revolution was not great for people. And so the idea of the fact that when mage is supposed to be a bunch of, we are uplifting people, we are taking people, basically showing people that there's a better way, we're lifting people out of their roots, we're making people into this, basically into better versions of themselves. And the Industrial Revolution is doing a whole lot of people are replaceable cogs in our new machinery. We are, so basically you have right away have that really easy background for your conflict where you can start to play with that if you wanted to go down that route. In terms of basically that gives you a really easy basically push and pull point. Like, oh, okay, so people are we're just basically, and you also have at the same time imperial expansion going on as well. Basically, it's Victorian Age is basically you're set in you're bringing in London, you're bringing in England at the height of its basically the English Empire, so you end up with Britain doing a lot of bad things and being colonialism exploding all over the map. And so you're bringing in, you're running into the basically into all of these other cultures who have their own experiences, their own concepts of what reality is, and you're putting that against the English Empire showing up and being like, nope, here is reality. Stop doing what you're doing. That is wrong and bad. We are here to enforce our own rules. We're going to promptly break all of them because we're going to tell you we're here to do a bunch of stuff in the names of morality, and then we're going to drag you off all over the world because, whoops, money. Basically, you have that source of tension, so you can involve a lot of different people groups because a lot of them are getting picked up and thrown into this new blender, and so the idea of mage with its idea of pulling someone out of that group and being like, hey, you've woken up to the fact that reality is what basically the rules aren't necessarily what everyone is saying they are. You have the power to do something about it. You have the power to change that. You have the power to stop this a little bit. And hey, let's throw different people into that idea. And basically, it's interesting because the quick start, the jump start guide, which is they're essentially, hey, here's a quick rules reference on how everything works. You just need this book to run it. The adventure, I'm kind of mixed on, but basically, it does give you a really interesting set of pre-generated characters. Basically, you get someone from the Ottoman Empire. You get a Chinese pirate who has been outraged by the British coming in and taking what is medicine, and then basically corrupting people with it, dumping opium into it. And so you have a Chinese pirate who is kind of fighting against that. That's another one of their quick starts. You have an assassin, who is I believe they're relocating from India. Yes. Basically it's an English-born, basically of Indian descent. And so basically who's an assassin. You have someone who's a little bit more shamanistic, which I believe this one is this. No, it's just, yeah, basically they're European shamanistic. So you're going Romani. You're going that kind of vibe. You have someone who is just a Western cowboy, who is a Californian son of a Native American and a freed slave. Basically, that's an interesting basically, and so but you get that Old West because, hey, the Old West actually is happening at the same time as the Victorian time period. It's it was kind of funny. One of the things they actually listed basically for one of the major inspirations that you could pull for this is the old TV show Wild Wild West, because Basically, the Wild Wild West. Basically, it's that great kind of steampunk idea of basically the Wild West is happening, but steampunk is happening, and that basically and that intersection there of basically because it's a basically basically this time period is a weird time period where where we have a lot of fantastic ideas about how the world worked. We have the um, don't you dare Tony get out. Gosh darn it, people watch the original TV show. It's much better. It's actually steampunk and not giant spiders made by people who are frustrated Superman producers. Um, but you have the Victorian area and all of that stuff going on. You've got the Wild West happening, and you've got the samurai era of Japan also all kind of happening at the same time. Um, all of those major things are happening at the same time. Um, and I think what's the last one is just basically basically a comfortable upper basically a comfortable upper class lady who awakens with magic, and so is having to deal with the fact that the world is different than she thinks it is, and having to deal with that. So it's a great basically so you can throw all of these interesting different characters, different basically different groups and things like that together, and then you throw them against a variety of different kinds of plots that you can have. You can set it entirely in the Wild West and basically do a plot based on that. You can set it in the brain going. You could set it basically in either basically in African fighting colonialism, in China fighting colonialism and doing it like that. You could set it basically in the opening of the Asian area, so India, Japan, all of those are all available. Or you could set it in Victorian. You could have a proper Victorian adventure with basically dealing with carriage chases and basically dealing with the court and all of that. Anywhere that is in England fighting colonialism, yeah. The Apache Wars post Civil War in America. All of those are settings as well. And you can even go wilder, which is what the direction I'm kind of leaning towards for this one. Just because I'm looking to keep this relatively light. Mostly because of the fact that this is going to be a short game. Short. It's going to be 4 or 5 hours. It's a one shot. So I'm not going to go for one of the things, basically, I'm not going to go for a big overall plot. Though, one of the things I will say, reading through, basically, the comments I will make, that anybody who's trying to look at this and be like, oh, hey, I'm interested in Victorian Age. Thing number one you should know, outside of the Jumpstart guide, if you just buy the Victorian Age, you need to also buy the Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition core book as well. Because the Victorian Age guide is how do I run Mage 20th Anniversary in Victorian Age. It does not have all of the rules that you need to play the game. The Jumpstart does. It's a slimmed down version, which can cause some problems we'll talk about here in a bit. But that does mean, the good thing about that means the fact that the Victorian Age book is a really cool book full of all sorts of interesting ideas and plot hooks and world building for this Victorian Age. It goes a lot into, okay, here is how all of the groups, all the different mage groups are kind of gotten along and are trying to they're all dealing with the rise of basically of the industrial age. Here's how they're all affected by that. Here's how they're all dealing with it. Here is the technocrat, here's what the Order of Reason, which will become the Technocratic Union, which will become the Technocracy. Here's its early starts, and its splits in groups and things like that. If you're wanting to play one of those type of games, or want to use them as bad guys in your games, here's how they're working and building and doing all of that. Cool. It's got all those great ideas, basically a lot of basically good world building in there for that. The other thing it has, which it's kind of just buried in there, basically, but it's got this really interesting idea for, hey, if you're wanting to play the proper Victorian mastermind level villain for your campaign. So you're wanting to have basically the Moriarty, essentially, for your Victorian age campaign. Basically, that's hard to do as a GM. That's hard to pull off because basically you're not actually the super G. They don't exist. They don't actually exist because they don't. They exist only in worlds where where writers exist and writers control both sides. Yes, the villain knew all along that the hero would do X, Y, and Z because the writer knew that they were going to make the hero do X, Y, and Z. Therefore, the villain could prepare for them to do X, Y, and Z. That doesn't work quite as well in role-playing games, where your villain can trip walking out the door and get stuck someplace. Or your heroes can roll really well, in the case of one campaign. Yes, exactly. Basically can pull back a bow and just keep rolling successes. And boy, howdy, you thought your villain was safe several miles away on that cliff top, but you're basically, hey, that one character just hit them square in the chest with an arrow. Oh gosh, now you have to deal with that. So they're like, hey, but you still want to play that because it's such an iconic part of a lot of these things. Loveless from Wild Wild West, again, the TV show. Basically Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes. All of those kind of just over-the-top dramatic villains that you kind of basically mastermindy type villains that you associate with these kind of situations. They introduced basically, again, kind of buried in this book. Let's see if I can't. Let me pull them up. Basically, they introduced two little things. Like, it's so buried in here, I'm having to go through and like, okay, where did they actually put it? Search faster. It's probably under storytelling. That would make sense for it to be under storytelling, right? Where are you? My gosh. There it is. Alright, there we go. Let me actually pull up the PDF here. So, like, it's buried under the section called genre variants, where they're talking about basically the idea, basically the main concept for Victorian Age is like, they love the idea of basically the gaslit mystery, because that is, yeah, that made me clarify TV show. Yes, darn you. So basically, so they've got this section in here about, okay, how do you make the Gothic antagonist? Malicious intent, modus operandi, basically signature style, but basically they've got these two kind of systems in here, one called master plan and the other is called reversals. And they're kind of complementary systems, but it's the idea of being honest with your players and setting expectations up front of, okay guys, you guys want to fight against the epic master villain. I have to actually play. I am not, basically, I can't control you. I am not an epic master villain. You're going to surprise me. So, here, basically, you have something called the master plan, which is a pool of up to 10 points the storytellers can spell to introduce surprising and unexpected story elements which favor the villain, also representing the villain somehow. And probably had planned this all along. And you can spend those at any point to introduce interesting things. And so they have, like, one is a twisting where it's a small change. Basically, like, that police officer, you got the bright idea of going to the cops. You just happened to basically, but he knew you'd go to the cops, and he's paid off that particular police officer to be corrupt. Not a major change, doesn't endanger the players. Escalating, the scene starts going places. Conjuring, where basically something comes into play which could possibly happen. It's not like basically something teleporting into the place, but it's the idea of the fact that basically the example they give is you're chasing the villain, and the villain was supposed to get away, but your mage with correspondence magic, or your mage with time magic, or whatever, has pushed you into a corner. So you have them duck into a nearby inn, the players follow them in, and the villain, basically, you push forward one, basically you play a point to be like, aha, you didn't know the fact that this inn was actually the headquarters for the White Serpents. Basically, I think the Alabaster Serpent cult. And so you're like, oh no, now he somehow knew that we would chase him here and has planned this up. And basically, if you spend all 3 points, you can have them immediately attacked by the cult. And so you're like, okay. Basically, they get jumped as soon as they come in. Basically, you've chased the character into the ballroom, and suddenly panels explode out of the walls, and his armies of trained ninjas imported directly from Japan strike at the players. It's things like that. Basically, the idea of the fact that, but you have put the points there. You have that pool, and it's the idea of the fact that, hey, I'm going to use this to increase tension throughout the game. I'm going to use it to be able to say I can break the rules somewhat during it, and I'm going to let you know, I'm being honest with you. Hey, here we go. This is how this works. You've got that system, and basically that also works on how they have this reversal system, which is essentially the idea of how slippery your characters are, representing the idea of the fact that basically, oh, he managed to get away again. There was a trapdoor under his feet this time. Or we captured him, but it was actually so-and-so in disguise. It wasn't actually him. He basically, one of his minions in disguise. He actually got away. And it's a pool of points which goes down over time as the players force you into a corner and you have to spend these points, but acts as an indicator to the players, oh, okay, now we're wearing him down. We're making efforts, we're pushing him, and now we've actually got him. We've reduced his reversal points, and the GM goes, cool, I know I'm playing with a villain in I know I'm playing with a villain with no reversal left, so I should plan on this being the end. It signifies to your players that this is going to be the end. It signifies to you this is going to be the end, and everyone can react appropriately. So those are really cool, big campaign ideas. I love that they're in here. So I love the fact that they took the time basically to build that kind of thing out into this sort of thing. Like, okay, how do we actually do that kind of game that we're interested in? So now that we've got 20 minutes left, let's at least boo, Tony, boo. But in terms of basically what am I going to do for this group? So one of the other things you can do, basically looking at Victorian era, the era of exploration, the idea of the fact that you could basically, I love the idea of the fact that there's this idea in Mage, basically, because again, Mage is a weird thing with basically that kind of hand waves and says everything is possible because as long as enough people believe in it, it's real. So there's ideas of umbral realms or places and things like that that exist that couldn't possibly exist. And so one of the ideas is, hey, that hollow earth idea that people believed for basically is kind of accepted as both, yes, Mage, basically it's the idea that basically a hollow earth idea is idea of it exists both as, no, it could never possibly exist. Well, it maybe existed in the past, but it doesn't exist anymore. So they're like, yep, it actually exists. The Hollow Earth idea is real inside of its own realm. And so, hey, basically, let's talk about basically so you can actually have the Hollow Earth as a place that you can throw things, and that's basically that fits well with Victorian era, because again, you get that basically that exploration going into the unknown that basically is kind of part of the Victorian era mindset. You have basically those books, Lost World type books written by um, Arthur Conan Doyle. Man, I lost his name for a bit. The idea of that there is a basically, and so you can throw your players into that thing with mage and be like, "Yep, this exists." So I love this idea of throwing these basically coming up with basically this idea, and so um, I think we're going to have the players fight dinosaurs because that's cool. I am going to cheat a little bit, just because of the fact that World of Darkness basically is a very crunchy system. For all of its basically, it's got really cool ideas, and I love Mage because of the fact that it's so open. It is ridiculously fun to play because it is the idea of the fact that as a player, you get handed a book with basically a set of crayons, and basically your party essentially splits up a box of crayons amongst them and are told to draw whatever solution you want, basically you can think of to this problem, using the crayon and the colors you have. And so you can get wild and crazy within your color scheme, essentially. Mage breaks down magic into what they call spheres, which are essentially areas of influence that their magic basically influences. You have correspondence or correlation, depending on what time period you're playing in, which is okay. That is your two basically how do 2 points interact in space and time, or in space, not in time, in space. Basically, this point here and this point here can basically a correspondence mage can go, oh, they're actually the same space. Cool. You could do all sorts of weird and wacky stuff with that, like pocket space. The idea of the fact that I can reach in here and pull stuff out of a closet that I have somewhere else. I can teleport. I can punch people better because if I punch here and basically your face is here, but I say that instead this point and this point are the same. Wow, that was really hard to dodge that because you thought I missed, but I actually hit you. Um, Martial arts, teleportation, all of that stuff falls under that correspondence spheres. You have the fire and you have the fire and air spheres of forces, which is all of the really dramatic, damaging stuff, creating fireballs, basically throwing lightning bolts, blowing people away, basically pulling stuff towards you. That's forces. You have water and earth, or basically water and earth, and all of that stuff. The matter sphere. Basically, hey, I can make stuff out of other stuff. I can shape walls. I can turn things into mud. I can basically anything non-living I can interact with. There's the basically life. Later with basically life. Well, there's life, which is a whole lot of hey. Basically, I can deal with anything living. That's healing. That's speeding up healing. That's speeding up growth and other stuff. Um, there's forces for life, time, speeding up time, slowing down time, all that fun stuff falls under time. Um, mind, all of the fun mind magic stuff you can do with that falls under mind. Um, Prime is what they throw under basically, which is just the magic do interacting with magic itself. It gets weird, but you need it basically. They kind of threw it in there as a catch-all. If you want to do weird stuff with magical energy and ramp up stuff, you've got to have Prime. And last is I think I'm missing something. What am I missing? I could just pull this character sheet up and look at it. I'm missing entropy. That's the one I'm missing. Entropy and spirit are the last two I'm missing. Entropy is chance and time and the fact that everything degrades, chaos, that everything breaks down. And spirit is everything to do with the afterlife, spirits, other stuff. All that falls into that category, that bucket. But basically, and everybody gets some amount of those things, and so you could do cool things. And so when you're setting up a mage campaign, the thing you have to realize is basically that session 0 is going to be your friend, because you're going to find out what crayons everyone's going to be bringing to the table. If you've got someone who's really good in matter or in correspondence or in time, you have to realize that your chase scenes might be difficult or different or have to work around that, because when you have someone who can slow down time and catch up with people, or can teleport from place to place with correspondence, or can go through walls with matter if they're high enough, hey, you need to take that into account. Same with forces, same with life and matter and things like that. So you have basically, mage is hard to run from that. Basically what Wolfman was talking about from that aspect is you have to be aware of what crayons people are bringing to the table, and you have to be flexible as a GM to realize they're going to sometimes, you need to throw situations at your players less than beat by beat situations. If you throw very particular things at your players, they're going to break. Basically, your players are more likely to break your stuff. They're more likely to be like, basically, yes, you trapped us in this room, and then they'll go through a wall. Yes, you've trapped us in this room, but I rot the door with entropy, or I grow the door with I grow the microbes with life, or something like that, or I brainwash one of the guards with mind. You've got to be aware of the fact that these things can happen and be flexible, which is the reason why when they talk about you're wanting to run this massive adventure, if you're running a campaign with a reoccurring villain, have buttons at your disposal. Basically, be upfront with your players and be like, listen, guys, you can break my stuff really easy because this is mage. Here are my, I want you to be upfront, and I'm going to tell you, here are my get out of jail free cards. Here are my escapes. I'm going to tell you up front that there's going to be times that you're going to come up with a solution to stuff which is absolutely going to break things, and I'm going to need to pull I have that, but I've planned for that. But I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm going to be like, let me spend some currency, let me be honest, and let me pay a price for it, but let me get out of this situation. And so when I'm planning this out, I'm going to plan this out in broader chunks. I'm going to want to make basically like the quick start basically really definitely does that in terms of it presents just a series of scenarios for the players. It's like, hey, this person approaches the party and they say, my husband left me with this pile of unresolved stuff and I want you to deal with it. And here basically it's literally just a list of, here's all the unresolved stuff. This person needs this taken care of. This person needs this taken care of. And there are situations like one of the ones that I'll talk, basically one of the ones is like, hey, this group of women are running into a basically are dealing with this problem. You need to help them. This set of artifacts is being misused. Stop it from being misused. And then they'll come the adventure takes their hand back, and that's what they're like, you're going to have to let your players go. It's kind of like Blades in the Dark. You're basically treating this like Blades in the Dark is going to be a good way of dealing with it in terms of don't root your players down into details. Don't root yourself down into details. Let your players throw situations at you and react to it. If that's not your style of play, don't run mage. If you can't react to your players ripping a sword out of the wall and attacking when you thought you had them disarmed, you're going to have a bad time with mage. It's not going to fit your play style. The downside to that is it's a little bit hard because World of Darkness has crunchy systems. So let me show you. Whoop. That's a character sheet in mage. there's a lot of stuff on there, a lot of different skills, a lot of different okay, so this top section here is stats. The next section, abilities, is all of the skills you can have. Spears are all the magic. Then you have backgrounds and other stuff, and you have health charts. So if you're like, hey, I want to send players to Hollow Earth, I've got to come up with stat blocks for dinosaurs. And while D&D, that's really easy. It's going to be a high strength, low dex, high con, low intelligence and wisdom. Give it a bunch of big hit points and some heavy hits, and we're good. Okay, that doesn't work quite as well for this system, where it's like, okay, I have to deal with what's its brawl, what's its athletics, and so I'm going to cheat a little bit. Someone very nicely already, basically this comes from the Storyteller's Vault, which is the basically essentially, which is on Drive-Thru RPG. It's essentially the idea of, hey, a certified group of people have written books for basically books for that they can sell through this system that they can get money for. So this is one of the ones from that, and it's basically just, hey, it's an adventure in Hollow Earth, but hey, by howdy, do you want to run a dinosaur encounter? These people have already thought of that for you. Cool. That's great. That's what I want. I want stats for dinosaurs that I don't have to try to make up on the fly. Because again, it's 4 or 5 hours, and I want to be able to deal with that. So there's your preview for next week over what we're going to be planning. I'm going to throw an adventure in Hollow Earth. I'm going to borrow liberally from Gina, I think. Yeah, from Jenna Floor here. It's Adventure to Hollow Earth. It's originally written as a more modern one, but again, I think it works perfectly for throwing people into basically into a more Hollow Earth type, basically into a more Victorian era. It's also great because Hollow Earth basically takes some of the limiters off of your players. It's a place where there isn't as much bad stuff to magic, and which I think is a good introduction, because you want your players to play with magic. If they don't use magic, mage is really boring. It's a bunch of okay skilled people wandering around doing stuff. That's not as interesting. You want people teleporting. You want people catching bullets. You want people basically mending wounds and basically throwing spikes out of ground and things like that. You want them to be playing with all of that. And so Hollow Earth is a magical place, so you don't get smacked in the face as hard when you do magic. Cool. Much nicer. Much easier. It does take away some of the thing, but it's one of those, hey, let's give people a taste of it. Let's give people something interesting to it. Then you go, oh, okay. That sounds interesting. Let's play with that. Then you can introduce the rules of, okay, now you're back in the real world. If you try to throw that fireball down the street, there will be consequences to it. Oh, okay. So now I have to make my magic more subtle or more interesting, basically, or other stuff. Oh, okay. Or deal with consequences. But if your players in Mage don't use magic, it's a boring game. If they're too afraid of, oh, I'm going to get smacked in the face with consequences, you can end up with a game that doesn't work as well. And so I feel like dumping them in a place where magic works is going to be much more interesting. So we'll end it on this note here. So no longer we'll do that. We'll go ahead and save that just as a start. So that's what we'll be talking about next week. Is basically we're going to start planning out those things, and we're going to set up some of those set pieces we talked about, where we're going to present the players with a problem. We're going to basically, and if we need to, we may go through and be like, okay, let's talk about possible solutions. Either A, so that we have an idea of, hey, this is what the players could throw at us, and so we need to shut down avenues and be like, no, okay, if I put that there, they're just going to walk past it, ignore it, blow past it, etc., etc. Or no, I want that. Basically, okay, I want that. That's one possible way of getting through it. That's another way of getting through it. Here's basically if everything goes wrong, here's what could happen. Okay, let's talk through all of those things. So that is what's coming next week. Again, so basically the plan for this month is this week and next week it's going to be planning for basically this Victorian Age, M20 Victorian Age. Then next Friday, the 17th, we'll be playing with the Lore Link players, playing it through this adventure. Basically we'll be playing through it, and you can see me using Lore Link to actually play through this adventure I will be creating as we go through this, through this process. The week after that, we're taking a brief break from role-playing and things like that to give my mind a break, and we're going to do something relatively mindless. We're going to play through Hunter the Reckoning, the video game. After that, we're going to be back to London and Magic with the Rivers of London's games by Chaosium. So that is all that we'll be doing in January. So if you want to catch all that, or if you want to catch all that, be alerted to when we go live, then you can check us. You can follow us here on Twitch. It's been a moment. I haven't done this in a hot second. You can follow us here on Twitch, and that will give you notifications when we go live. You can say, hey, I want some cool emotes, or hey, I want to support these people for the cool things they're doing. You can click subscribe. We will gladly accept your encouragement in the form of subscriptions. If you want to do that, and you're like, hey, I don't want to do that, but I want to give you that, but I don't have money. It's one of those times. Hey, if you happen to have Amazon Prime, you have Amazon Gaming gives you one free Twitch sub, per month, and if you want to give that to us, we'd be greatly appreciative of it. Our guarantee to you is the fact that while Jeff Bezos might take that money and spend it on a yacht, we will never spend that money on a yacht. And so that is a great way of basically only in-game yachts. It's the only way that money gets spent. If you want to catch our past things, if you want to catch those the Dark Ages game that we played in the past, just to get kind of a better look at how Vampire plays out, using Lore Link, you can check us out on our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel has all of our stuff for the last year and a half, archived back there. So there's all sorts of content. We talking about various different game systems, running different games. All of that is there. 2+ years now. Woo. If you want a more broken down, categorized version of it, you want to basically be like, hey, I want to find the actual plays and the planning sessions all in one place. That's where our system pages that I pulled up earlier, like you can go to the Vampire the Dark Ages at the bottom of that system examples page and click on it, and it'll list all of the sessions we had planning and playing that adventure. Of course, if you're over on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Those are both free over on YouTube and help get our videos out there. Basically all that. And of course, if you're interested in Lore Link, the system that you're actually running, which you can see in front of you right now, which I've just started to crack open, Lore Link is available for free at our base tier. If you go to our Get Started page, you can hit that page, and it will will walk you through the process of connecting to creating an account in the campaign. And you can get started and create your own campaigns. So you can start planning out your own campaigns, whether in Mage, D&D, Pathfinder, whatever system you want to play. Lorelink is there to help you organize your thoughts and get all your things kind of organized into a place so you can react to your players when they suddenly throw wild and random stuff at you, whether it's going off course and going to a random village instead of the castle, or ripping stuff out of walls with mage. Basically, all of those things, basically, you can plan and track those things in Lorelink. Last, of course, is if you want to keep up to date with what Lorelink is doing with new features, new streams, and all of that fun stuff, or just want to have basically general conversations about stuff. Like we just recently had a stream where I went through basically a thread where I went through and talked about our basically all the bunch of games in my library. Basically, that is our social media department. That is either our newsletter. You can get our newsletter, which gives you all the summaries and features without the dealing with social media. Understandable. Or if you want to be more interactive, you can check us out on Blue Sky, where you'll get more smaller bits of information delivered to you as they occur. As well as other fun little conversational bits and bobs and things like that. So check us out on there. So, all of that to say, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for basically. Thank you all for. We'll leave you on the notes. Basically, as our our communication manager says, our social media is accessible. So don't fall in. Stay warm out there. If you're in a place much like I am, where it is buried in snow and freezing cold, please stay warm. We will catch you all next time. Thanks for watching.